This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gould.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. I am Steve Gould. Thank you for being on the podcast that interviews police officers. I have to stress that the back catalog of the show is totally insane, and not to my own credit, but to the men and women that come on here and tell these stories. If you're new to the show, I encourage you to look back to binge listen to some of the older stuff, even all the way back. I recently I was a guest on a podcast, and they asked me about some of the stories, and I had to go through all the stories that the guests have told, and they're truly insane. Like I was overcome with how many just nuts things police see in the course of their duty. So they're all back there, and you should just check them out. Tell a friend about it. Trying to grow the show, trying to get some legs under it. We're doing good. We are really getting out there, and the show is growing, getting some really, really good numbers recently. The 5-star reviews on Apple iTunes really helps the show out. We're up to, I don't know, 750 or something like that. But if we get to 1,000, that's the sweet spot. I just want to see the 1K. So if you love the show, I encourage you to do that. If you really love the show, if you're a huge fan, you listen to a lot of episodes, and you just want to really, really show that, becoming a Patreon or becoming a patron is the way to do that. When you go there, there's a link in the show notes. You can become a patrolman or a sergeant. There's some extras. You'll get videos of the interviews. I'll mail you a TPS vinyl logo sticker people really like. And if you join the sergeant rank, I'll give you a shout out. I'll answer a question that you have on the show. Got a bunch of sergeants on there, but nobody's asked a question yet. But if you do, I will answer it. And you'll when you go to Patreon, it's just like when you join it, it's like the feed is like Facebook. So I do posts and stuff like that, a little bit about, maybe what I'm going at work or behind the scenes, and you have direct access to ask me questions and stuff like that. So if you're a huge fan and you want to show your support, that's the way to do it. If I could just grow the show through Patreon, that would be amazing. I am talking with some sponsors, and I will obviously take one on if it fits right. But Patreon just seems there's so much freedom in it. It would be amazing if that would happen. So, without further ado, let me read roll call for the Patreon sergeants. Pull that up. All right, guys. Yes. Okay, here we go. I'm talking about Andrew Horton, Jacob Martin, Emmy Martin, Trevor Daly, Rick McCormick, Scott Minkler, Tammy Wall, Sean Clifford, Braden Walker, Caitlin Thomas, Sasha McNabb, Corey Payne, Glenn Topping, the great Mike Wynn, Nathan Gowan, Jason Lau, Dylan Pyrozic, John G. Good, the great Sarah Pomeroy, Lauren Stimpson, Alex Wazik, Brandon Hooker, Jake Pinito, John Shoemaker, James Rose, Seth Wright, Tony Fahey, Andy Biggs, Chris June, Andy Mihal, the great Gary Steiner, boy, Lane Campbell. My goodness. Thank you, everybody, for donating and supporting the show that way. I'm a real mess today, but I appreciate you sticking with us. Have a fantastic show today. Have a guy on with a specialty that I've never. I don't think we've had anybody on with what this guy does or did in his career. Without further ado, let me just read his intro. He's got 20 plus years law enforcement career with Pinal County Sheriff's Office. Hope I got that right, Randall. 10 years devoted to child crimes investigations, including internet crimes against children. Experienced educator with 7 years at Arizona State University, plus over 15 years in professional training covering law enforcement topics. 2016 U.S. Attorney General Special Commendation recipient, awarded Medal of Distinction, Pinal County Attorneys Victims' Rights Award, and Dr. Marie Griffin Distinguished Alumni Award, and also a published author. So without further ado, let me bring on Randall Snyder. Sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure to have you. Now, you go by Randall or Randy or something different?
Usually Randall if I'm in trouble, Randy for people when I'm not. So
all right, we'll stick with Randy then. Thank you for coming on, man. Now I was hitting on a little bit in the intro there, and what I was talking about was the child crime stuff, and more specifically the internet crimes against children, which is fascinating to me. And I have a friend over, and my wife, and they're up in the kitchen and getting some supper ready. And I said, this is a perfect opportunity. They're both women. Let me ask them, because my wife is crazy about online stuff. Like she doesn't even want pictures of our kids online. And I get it, because I'm also active law enforcement. My page is private and all that. But how dangerous is that, would you say, having pictures of your little ones up, or maybe having them on your YouTube channel?
It kind of varies. For the people that want to have a Facebook page so that you can share family pictures with your friends and your family and things like that, as long as you keep the security locked down so that it's restricted to the people that you allow, it's pretty safe. There are incidents of hacking and things like that, but for the most part, most people are pretty plain Jane, and so the hackers are not necessarily going to go after them. To have it an open account where anybody can see it, or worse yet, to let the kids have their own account that's not as monitored, doesn't necessarily have all the parental guidance. That's the worst, and that's where you really run into a lot of trouble. And my wife was the same way. When I was active, she didn't put my pictures on Facebook. We tried to keep the kids off of it as much as possible. She really only used it to see what her friends were doing, because she didn't want any of that out there.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like we have a friend of ours who's a female prison guard at a federal prison that's local, like an hour from here. And, her and my wife will talk after church and stuff, and they'll be chatting and, how's work going? Oh, well, I found it's like 2/3 of these guys in the federal prison are paderasses. They're like perverts. And, they probably put there by gentlemen like you. And they'll find like baseball cards with kids on them, like just Little League, like any random local thing they can get a hand on with kids on it. Like that's really disturbing to think that these people like just have pictures of children that they're obsessing over, it's.
And some of the guys that I've caught have even gone so far to try and, minimize their exposure, that they were cutting pictures out of like the Walmart ads, the JCPenney ads, the kids in their bathing suits, stuff like that, because that was close enough to do what they needed to do. And it didn't typically stay at that. That was kind of a transition, but
it's like the marijuana of child porn.
Yeah, exactly.
The gateway. I was listening to a podcast recently, and there was I listened to all different kinds, but this was about stand-up comic was talking about where he grew up in Florida, and he told this story about his dad was coming home from work, and this guy that worked 2 houses down had him over his shoulder and was running down the street with him. He had grabbed him out of the yard. The dad got out, attacked the guy, and took his son. When the cops went there, this guy had all kinds of crazy photographs of the kid, had pictures through the kid's bedroom window of the kid in the room, and had a shrine set up, and then a bunch of medieval tools in the bathroom, in the bathtub, all set up for who knows what. And, not to this is probably freaking people out, but, you just never know. You never know what's in the heart of someone.
And that definitely takes crazy to a whole new level. That's a dedication that you don't normally see in these guys. But you don't never know who it is. And one of the things that was always surprising to me throughout my career was it wasn't always the guy that you looked at and went, oh yeah, he's driving a white panel van. He's handing out candy to kids, asking to see my puppy. Some of these guys were normal, everyday people. I mean, one of them was an elementary school principal that had been teaching for 20 some odd years. One of them was a pilot in the Air Force.
Wow.
A couple of them were prison guards, both at the state and federal level. And one of them was a detention guard or detention officer in my own agency. So wow. It runs the gamut of who gets into this kind of thing, and it really means that parents need to pay attention to what their kids are doing, who they're talking to, because you just never know where it's going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my daughter, my oldest is 13, and it's like you're going to get them a phone because they start going places. And honestly, it's the best way for me to track her location is if she has a phone. But like you were saying before, it doesn't really matter. Like these phones the devices are so like intoxicating to us. Like, and to me, like if I get one notification, I'll end up going on my phone for half an hour. And sometimes I'll even forget to look at that notification because I'm checking email. I'm going to think, especially with the podcast, all kinds of messages. And I just start, my neck will start hurting. Same with her. I mean, how can I expect more from her? I give her the phone and now it's like, we tell her to stay off certain things, but she'll like, well, I just want to listen to this song, or I'm just going to listen just for these Christian story hour on whatever. And before you know it, you catch her on something completely different. And there's weird stuff. Even commercials are bizarre and out there. So we kind of like what we did is like at nighttime, the phone has to be out of her room and she only really has access to it if she's going to go somewhere. And then we try to limit any kind of surfing or any kind of free just like exploration on the phone. But it's really hard to keep them away from it entirely, Right.
And so many of them now use applications like Snapchat and Instagram as a way to communicate back and forth instead of just a simple text message because it has so much more functionality. And those are the same places where, these creeps are finding kids. And it is hard to, put a limit on what they can and can't do because it's so-and-so has it, so-and-so has it. And you want them to be able to have the experiences with their friends, but at the same time, you have to be very careful how much leeway you give them. Now, I will tell you that there are some applications out there that are good parental control applications that, depending on how much you want to pay, depending on how secure you will be, it will send you a copy of every text message that they sent, every picture that they take. You can get it down to where you're getting a copy of absolutely everything to make sure what they're doing is appropriate. The problem is, like you said, your phone's blowing up 100 times a day anyway.
Right.
Do you want to get 300 more notifications from all of her stuff, most of which likely has nothing to do with anything that you would care about? And so you kind of have to weigh how much security you want, how much privacy you want to give them, where to put that trust. And a lot of times it's the parental controls, just being able to cut it off when you need to, that can be the most help.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I could see that. The kids got to be careful. Like the agency I used to work at, I'll never forget this. These kids dated when they were 16 and when they turned 18, they broke up. And then the kid, the guy started sharing these photos of the girl with his friends. It's high school. So it's like everybody's gonna see it. And she was a pretty young girl and, the stuff flew around like wildfire. Well, she was 16 in the pictures. It's like when they first started dating. Now the kid's 18 in Massachusetts law. Now he has child porn on his phone. And he's now also disseminated child porn to a bunch of people. And it turned into this huge case. And it was like, oh my gosh. It's almost like these things are like, you can get into trouble. You can get into felonies so quickly. And he didn't even mean to, he didn't think he was committing these big crimes. But when you get pissed off parents demanding prosecution, what are you going to do?
Well, and I'm not sure what the statute is in Massachusetts, but in Arizona, a single image of a child under the age of 15 is a presumptive 17 years in DOC. So for every picture that you have of a child that's aged under 15, and you have kids at 13, 14, 15 that are taking these pictures, they're sending them out to Mr. or Mrs. Right Now, you can end up with a whole lot of trouble. You can end up with serious, serious issues.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm glad we're homeschooling. I'll tell you that right now. Randall, can you tell it, like, I have to say up front, what you did for all those years, that decade, investigating these type of crimes it takes a special kind of investigator for that, because it's hard to stomach, like, a lot of the stuff you have to see. I know, like, a lot of cops, when a case like that comes in, they're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be tricky, because now no cops really like dealing with juveniles or juvenile law. It's like, oh my gosh, this can be hard. And then when you add the images and the severity of crime, these crimes, it's hard to fathom stomaching that for 10 years. Was there a major motivation that got you into it, or an event or anything like that?
So really what got me into it was I'd gotten a case from one of our forensics guys back in 2012, and it was an exploitation case where a guy was downloading images off of BitTorrent. And just the kind of the complexity of it and the newness of it, I thought was really interesting. And then I started looking at more of the trafficking side of it. And while I didn't end up doing much with the trafficking side, it kind of brought me into the ICAC realm. Once I was in, I'll be honest, my motivation was the fact that I have 3 kids. At the time, they were all younger. My girls were, in 14, they were 3 and 6. And so, I knew that every one of these SOBs that I put away was one less I had to worry about going after my kids. My son was in Boy Scouts. I was his Boy Scout leader. So I've got this almost adoptive family of all of these scouts that I'm thinking I need to take care of. I've got my girls in their activities and all of their friends. And I'm thinking I need to protect all of these kids. And so really it kind of just snowballed into, I need to be as well informed as I possibly can. And I need to take down as many of these people as I can to make sure that my kids are safe and to make sure the kids that my kids hang around with are safe. And really that was the driving force to get me through some really horrible times right up until the end, when I recognized how burned out I was. I was showing a lot of the symptoms of PTSD, and I started to recognize that, I had come to the end of what I could do for them without destroying myself. And that's when I was eligible for retirement at that point, and I decided to take it so that I could spend the next bit of time protecting my kids in a different realm by just being there and being their dad and not constantly being out there trying to protect other people's kids.
Yeah, because as police officers, anyways, we see so many terrible things that, like, it's hard not to drift to that place when you're with your kids, or if they get a ride somewhere or whatever else. You're already like hyper vigilant with your kids. You're like, because everything that could happen. You've been to even like terrible car wrecks, and you're like, your mind is already going. So taking on the burden of actually bird dogging, investigating all these crimes against kids, I can only imagine how stressful that could be, man. That's, God bless you, because someone's got to do it. That's really, really tough. Can you explain what ICAC is?
ICAC is the Internet Crimes Against Children, and there are 61 task forces around the country. Most of them are either embedded with the FBI or Homeland Security, although some of them are state agencies that kind of work with the federal agents but don't necessarily embed with them. And their whole job is to take, two jobs. To take all of the reactive cases that are coming from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and work those to try and identify and locate the children, rescue the children, and whenever possible, hold the perpetrators accountable. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is the clearinghouse for the U.S. for all electronic service providers in the country. So any place in the U.S. that is an electronic service provider, whether it be Craigslist, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, I guess it's Meta now, any of them, if they come across anything on their platform that they believe is child exploitation material or child abuse material, they're required by federal law to send that to the National Center, and then the National Center will work it up and determine the severity or the priority, and then send that out to all of the Internet Crimes Against Children task forces. And we would get those tips and then go out and work those. The other side of it, which I found to be a lot more fun, was the proactive side, where we did undercover work online. And we could either go undercover as an adult, as a bad parent trying to find other like-minded individuals, or we went on as a kid and did the to catch a predator kinds of stuff,
right?
And put ourselves out there so that hopefully the bad guys would find us instead of live kids. And my sheriff likes to joke that I was the best 14-year-old girl in the county because despite what you see here, I was actually a pretty good 14-year-old girl for the better part of 6 years, and had a lot of fun doing that. But, beyond the fun of being able to catch bad guys, we were able to rescue a lot of children. We were able to take a lot of these guys off the street so that other kids weren't getting harmed. And so it made it worth it for most of the time.
It's so screwed up. I mean, were you overwhelmed with how the volume of people you could attract, and it's like you never ran out of clientele probably. It just was a tidal wave.
So when we talk about the reactive side, the tips from NCMEC, I think it was last week or week before last, the numbers came out. They put out a weekly stat sheet, and in a 7-day period, they had received over 1 million reports of child exploitation being transmitted online. And that's in a 7-day period. So when you talk about overwhelming, that's a million reports in a 7-day period that now get to be disseminated out to 61 task forces for them to try and work. When it came to the proactive side, I once put an ad on a social media platform, and I won't call them out by name because, liability. But all I said was, I'm so bored. I had 60 responses in the first 60 minutes that the ad was up from guys telling what they believed to be a 14-year-old girl the things that she could do to not be bored anymore. And none of them involved
reading the Bible.
Prurient by that. Yeah. None of them were Bible studies. That's for sure. And so to have 60 responses in the first 60 minutes, I was working those cases by myself out of Pinal County, so I can only work so many of those at a time. I can only respond to so many of them at a time. And you're right. I was never out of work. I never didn't have something to do.
How awful. I actually know personally of a smaller agency that got one of their officers certified in these investigations, and it became too much because the chief only had so many people, and he was like, hey, what's going on? And she was basically like, this is like my full-time job now. You know how many people I have right now we're investigating? This is like a 20-man department. He's like, hey, no, we can't give this kind of manpower to this. And because the crimes were coming from all over the country, but if they're centered in your town, either jurisdiction can prosecute either, where they're coming from or if the person's in your jurisdiction, either one can kind of like a restraining order violation, and right. It was too much. It was like went to the class and boom, I got 30 guys on the line here. It was like, damn, that's real depressing. It's like, what a broken world.
Some of us would actually come back from trainings with cases that were active. I went to Florida for my online ads class, which is what the training is called, the certification training is called, and ended up getting a case that I worked on my way back. I went to the Dallas Crimes Against Children conference one year, and I was taking kind of a refresher course on some of the newer techniques for working online, some of the newer platforms and things like that. and ended up making a case and had to call my partner on break and say, hey, run these names for me. We're going to go catch this guy when I get back on Monday. But in the meantime, if you'll start the workup, I'll keep the chat going and I'll set it up so that Monday morning when I'm back in the office, he can show up and meet. And we ended up getting the guy. And I did most of the chats from Dallas. So it is crazy. You talk about how it goes all over the place. I had a total when I was doing it full time. I ended up making cases in 33 states and 8 foreign countries. I had 2 in Australia, 2 in New Zealand, 1 in France, 1 in Germany, 3 in Canada. I mean,
what's the process for another country?
Well, I kept hoping for subpoenas to have to go testify, and none of them would fly me anywhere. But most of the time what we could do is either contact the legal attaché in that country and send it over through kind of a mixture of Interpol over to the legal attaché. But a lot of times what we found was that these were priority cases that needed immediate attention. And we'd frankly get on Google, find a contact phone number for that agency in that country and reach out either by phone or by email and get somebody on the line and say, here's what I've got. Here's the packet of information, go forth and arrest. So and it worked really well. I will say that the partners that we had in other countries, with the exception of Pakistan and India were the only ones where I got no assistance whatsoever. But all the rest of the countries were right on board. They said, absolutely, we'll take it. Went and did what they needed to do with their bad guy. And I even got a couple letters from chiefs and things like that in those countries after they made their arrests and said, hey, thanks for letting us know on this. It really helped get this offender out of our neighborhoods. And the internet's global, so the victims are too, and we have to be prepared to help wherever the bad guy pops up.
I love to hear that, man. That's awesome. Wow, because we're always we'll get like a lot of older people get scammed out of money, and I've actually a few years ago I actually got on the phone with a guy. And they're usually in like Jamaica, or they're not up from our country, and they'd sent this person $5,000, and it's like so frustrating because it's no one like something like that. No one really cares to investigate it. Jamaica's not real cooperative, and it's like, the guy on the phone, his attitude was, if I can call a dumb American and they give me $5,000 over the phone, do you think they deserve the $5,000? And I was like, that's a good point, but it's still very wrong that you did it. But we always had like no recourse, but with something like what you were doing, that's awesome to hear, man. They'd actually
and I had cases that would come from other countries too. So I actually had a colleague down in New South Wales, Australia, that he had a couple of victims down there, and through their legal processes, they figured out that the suspect was in our area. And so through our collaboration, not only was I able to get the bad guy, he ended up having an additional 22 victims that I could identify and about another 40 that I couldn't. And he had additional victims, not only the 2 in Australia, but 1 in England, a couple in Ohio, a couple in New York, 1 in Arizona, 1 in California. I mean, just all over the place. And if Australia hadn't been willing to reach out to us and say, here's what I've got, that guy would still be out there doing this. He would still be out there, extorting and blackmailing images from these kids. He had one victim as young as 9. Ugh. And so it was kind of one of those things where we all recognized that we had to work together to get these guys, because the victims could be anywhere, the suspects could be anywhere, and you never knew when it was gonna land in your area.
Wow, that's incredible. We have the show actually has a bunch of pretty good fan base in Australia. So I've been trying to get an Australian cop on, but they're super strict. They are they're almost afraid to come on because their government is very strict with cops talking about anything there. But Australia, if you're listening, come on the show, baby.
I will. I'll talk to you off air and see about getting you the contact of my buddy from that case, because we've kept in touch. He actually flew over here, and we got to have dinner together and stuff. And my wife and I are trying to figure out how to plan a trip over there. And he has since retired also. Oh, perfect. And so, yeah, maybe you can get some insight that won't get him in trouble. I don't know. I don't know what his limitations are, but I'll talk to you when we're done and see if we can hook that up.
Yeah, I got to get that sexy Aussie accent on here for the lady listeners, you know? That's awesome. Randall, what was the first like very notable or very first notable case you had involving this stuff that was like very substantial and stood out?
One of the first cases I got when I went into investigations was a guy in our area who, I want to say he was about 34, 35 years old at the time. He was a father of 4 kids, and he had I believe, 14-year-old son. And he was doing what dads are supposed to do. He was going through his son's phone, making sure that his son wasn't being inappropriate, and tripped across some messages that the son had been sending to a girl that was his age, indicating that they, were maybe looking to start dating. Well, the dad decided that he wanted this girl instead, and he reached out to her and he started grooming her. Ugh. And over the course of a period of time, he ended up able to sexually exploit her, actually met her in person a couple of times where he sexually abused her. And once her parents found out, of course, then we got involved. And the thing that was just so amazing to me, when we took him down, we actually used some one-party consent calls between her and him to set up a date where instead of meeting at the park with her, he was going to meet at the park with us. He just didn't know it.
Excellent.
And he told his wife he was going to go to the corner store to buy a Gatorade. And about 45 minutes later, one of our investigators went and knocked on the door and said, "I'm sorry to inform you, we have your husband in custody, and here's why." And it was,
wow.
It was so mind-boggling to think about a professional guy, lives in a nice neighborhood, has a nice house, has a nice family, has a good career. I mean, everything that is just as white bread as you could imagine, that for whatever reason decided one day that he was going to go after this 14-year-old girl. Wow. And he's now spending, I want to say his plea was for 28 years, 24 years, something like that in prison.
Good.
And it really blew my mind. How could anybody throw away an entire life like that just because they thought a young girl was good looking and they thought that would be something they wanted to try?
Yeah, it's like it's insanity because you he's made it this far in his life. You don't know what young girls are like. Like you don't think no one's going to find out. Keep the secret forever. Like,
right.
It's like just on the logical side of it, like it's like he lost his mind. Like that's insane.
Yeah. And it was that case, and in talking to her parents and stuff, that I really got a sense for how important it was to work these cases and how much it meant to the victims to be able to get deprogrammed, because this guy, he had done his grooming very well. This girl was fully convinced that she was in love with him and he was going to leave his wife for her. And she was just waiting until she turned 16 so that they could hop in a car and drive up to Nevada and get married. And she thought this was going to be the love of her life because he had programmed her through the grooming process to believe that. And afterwards, getting to interact with her later on in the court process and seeing how she had been deprogrammed and was realizing what this guy did to her, really made it worth it to experience what I had to experience so that these kids wouldn't have to continue experiencing what they were.
It's crazy. I mean, who isn't at that age? Like if you're romantically involved on a very innocent way, like you think, you think you're going to marry that person. You're like, I love you so much. It's like puppy love, you know, like you're just, and a grown man playing on that, like, oh, it's so awful. I have seen in my career how easy it is to do, and especially over online stuff where like you do the initial interview and the kid is like, well, why did you send him pictures of your private parts? Like a 13, 14-year-old kid. He asked me to. And it's like, this kid's like a normal kid with like a normal family. And you're like, is that it? Like, yeah, well, I knew him for a couple weeks online and he was funny and we were friendly. And then they sent all these videos and pictures of their private parts. And it's like, it's unbelievable just how innocent they are. You know, it's like,
right.
To see someone exploit that, you want to like kill that person. You know what I mean? You're like, that. What a piece of like garbage. What an animal. It's right. Unreal. And the fact that, I mean, you probably never had a slow day. I mean, it's just like, it's like the conveyor belt of customers coming through. It's crazy.
The only time I had a slow day was when I would come into the office and consciously think, you know what, I'm playing Candy Crush today all day. That's all I'm doing.
Mental
Candy
health
Crush.
day.
I gotta take a day to kind of decompress some of this.
Yeah. So you're doing background investigations now. Kind of fun. I mean, talk about like less brain power involved and like pretty easy. And it's kind of, I did it for LAPD for a while and I really enjoyed it. And I really like to sit with a new candidate that was like, you know, just like not beaten down yet, just like kind of like wanted to do the job and so into it. They're doing the workouts and there's something that like almost like I am a redhead. It's almost like drinking some of their soul during the interview. Like, let me get some of that. Yeah, things are good, you know. With
youthful enthusiasm. I need more of that.
Exactly. I want to change the world. I want to, I'm doing this because I like to help people. That's always the thing they say. But it's kind of interesting. And you know by now, I'm sure. I mean, when you're a background investigator, you can even come across crimes. People tell you things, and you're like, do I have to report about this?
Yeah. And we were just talking about that at the office the other day about, because so much of people's lives is on social media now that we're focusing on social media in the background and having to look through their Facebook and their Instagram and their Snapchat. And I had a kid come in, 18-year-old kid, nice kid. Okay, show me your social media. And I get into his Snapchat and he's got the 4 eyes for your eyes only. And I said, okay, I need you to unlock this. He was like, sir, I'd really rather not. There's some stuff in there. And I went, delete it all now. That's the only thing that's going to save you. And but it's so refreshing to dig into somebody's past and not find anything, because for so long, every time I dug into somebody, all I found was what a horrible waste of oxygen they were.
Unredeemed human.
Yeah. And to be able to deal with people day in and day out now that, I dig in and there's nothing, and it's refreshing because there really is nothing. It's not that I just didn't find it. And so it's really been a nice switch to see that there is some good in humanity again. Although it's ironic because I retired at the beginning of 2021, and in January, and in May of 2021, I was called to testify for a trial on a case that had started back in May of 2016. And so even when I was out, I wasn't out. I got another call from an investigator just the other day that a case on a guy that I had worked in 2018 is being released from federal prison up in Connecticut. And I'm flying up there at the end of the month to pick him up and bring him back so that we can get him on the charges that we got him on back in 2018 before the feds got a hold of him. I got another one, a call from a FBI guy out in Virginia that said, hey, you remember this guy back in 2018? I said, yeah, I remember him. He goes, yeah, we're going to grand jury on him here pretty soon. We're going to try and get him indicted. Can you fly out to testify if we need you? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll take a trip to D.C. on the federal, dime.
Yeah.
But even when you're out, you're not out, because so many of these cases are such long-term and involved cases that where does it end?
You got to see them through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang. I mean, so for that, the feds will pay for the flight. Are they paying? I mean, is your agency paying, or is the federal government giving you a witness fee, or like how are you getting paid?
So the feds will pay for my hotel per diem, the flights, all of the travel stuff. And then typically what my agency will do is they'll just let me do it on duty time. So I'm getting paid my same hourly rate. I just am not in the office for that week or that couple of days. So
that's cool.
It works out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a little of that happens on a much smaller level with like leaving an agency here, going to another agency. Of course, you have cases that are not tied up. They're not. There's loose ends, and you got to go to court and whatever. And it's like, the agency's like, well, who's going to pay him? Like he just came on board here. He started this with you. You got to pay, like that type of deal. Like the chicken shit. Like just pay someone, pay the cop to go to court. But it sounds like you're dealing with major cases, so it's not even a question. Like we want, and probably if you could probably even tell the feds like, hey, I'm not getting taken care of by my agency, and they might do something for you. You don't know. They might throw you a per diem thing or a little stipend. I don't know if they do that stuff, but if they want you there.
Yeah. I'm not sure how the feds would do the stipend. I did ask Maricopa County when they had me go testify in that trial. I said, hey, not for nothing, I'm technically retired now. You want to pay for me to come testify? And they said, no. If we pay you to testify, defense is going to bring that up. It's going to be a question. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll put it as my reserve time. So, I can keep my certification with my agency. But
oh, that's cool. So you're saying like you're keeping your sworn certs up where you are now?
Yeah, I stayed on as a reserve so I could still be able to, go do fun stuff every once in a while. And the reserve sergeant was nice enough to go, yeah, you're kind of a waste in patrol. You haven't done any of that in 10 years. We'd have to retrain you. So how about you go to training and teach guys stuff? You know how to do that. I said, perfect. That fits me to a T.
A-okay. That's great. Yeah. You don't. Do you mind doing 8 weeks of field training just to get reacclimated, so you can do a patrol shift twice a month?
Right. So we can teach you how to write a ticket again. I'm going, I don't really want to go to court. So, okay. Training's good.
That's awesome. Randall, can you tell us about like the most strange or bizarre thing you dealt with? It doesn't have to be child sex crimes, but just as a cop in general.
Wow. There's so many. Probably one of the earliest bizarre ones that I had that I still to this day shake my head. There was a lady that lived in our area, and she was the one that all the rookies got pawned off on. And so as the new guy, I got to deal with her a couple of times until more new guys came in. And this woman she was 90 years old if she was a day. And she was absolutely convinced that Bob Hope had been stalking her for the better part of 40 years. And there was no convincing her otherwise.
Makes sense.
And so, so every once in a while she would call and we would have to go explain to her that, no, ma'am, Bob Hope did not eat your cat's food or move your glasses or, Bob Hope was not knocking on your window last night, ma'am. That was a monsoon. It was an actual storm.
He loves cat food.
Yeah. and he had a gang of people that would, rattle her AC vents and things like that. And so when Bob Hope died, we all thought, all right, she's going to quit calling.
Done.
Yeah, guess what? The first media conspiracy was that, was designed specifically to protect Bob Hope so he could continue stalking her with impunity. And so several years after Bob had died, and she was still calling us on a regular basis. And one day I unfortunately happened to be on, and there were no new guys on to deal with her. She had fallen in the bathtub, and I had to help force entry so that we could go and rescue her because she had fallen and couldn't get up.
Sure.
And after that, we started bugging her daughter down in Florida and saying, look, you got to get her somewhere where she can get help. Yeah. So her daughter came and picked her up and was driving her back to Florida and stopped somewhere in New Mexico for the night to spend the night. And we got a call late that night, probably 2-3 o'clock in the morning, from this agency in New Mexico going, all right, guys, what's the deal? She's saying she's been kidnapped by Bob Hope and she's in New Mexico and we need to figure out what's going on. We had to explain to the officers in New Mexico that no, she hadn't been kidnapped. This really was her daughter. It was not part of Bob Hope's gang. And she was being taken to Florida to be taken care of. And, and it was just one of those weird things that was a rite of passage for a while for all the new guys coming through, that you have to deal with this woman. You have to deal with her Bob Hope thing and go and try and placate her. So
that's funny, man. I've dealt with a few people like that in my career that were just slipping, and I remember the census came around years ago. And so like the initial complaint to this house was like, somewhat legit. She's like, yeah, there was these 2 Asian people here with a clipboard, and they were like trying to like see if I lived in town. We're like, oh yeah, it's probably the census. Well, from that call on, it went on for years because she would tell us that there's Asians at my house and I want them out of here. It's like 3 a.m. I'm on overnights. We go there and I'm like, is this the guy you mean from the census? He came back here? Because we didn't know at this point. And she's like, yeah, he came back here. He was crawling around up on my roof, and now he's in my attic. And I'm like, oh. So this is the beginning. We did the same thing. We're like, do you have a son or daughter? Or we were calling them all the time. They lived way far away. And it's amazing how, like, if that was my mom, I would be like, let me get on a plane and bring her to my house, or something like that. But it was a complete burden to these people. It was like, well, don't you have like a council on aging that can like come visit her during the day? It's like, well, yeah, but there's like, she thinks Asian people are crab walking across her roof at nighttime looking in her windows. Like she's not long for this world. Maybe you want to spend some time with your mom, But yeah, that's Bob Hope. Why Bob Hope? What did he ever do? She watched The Price is Right too much.
She had something about Bob Hope from when she was younger, and man, it stuck. I don't know. He must have been on a USO tour with her at some point. I don't know.
That's funny. Randall, can you tell us about the most intense thing you dealt with on the job?
About 3 months after my son was born, my oldest, it was August in Arizona. We're still hot. We're still hitting triple digits. 110, 115 is not uncommon. Triple most days.
It's not ginger weather.
No, it's miserable, but it's a dry heat.
So it's fine.
Right. It's kind of like being in a broiler instead of a steamer, would be the comparison. And it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I had a posse guy, and we have a civilian posse that are volunteer individuals who have received some training. They're certified to carry a firearm. They go through similar quals that we do.
Oh, interesting.
The only difference is they're not sworn, so they don't have powers of arrest unless they're with one of us, and we say, yeah.
Oh, wow, like old school posse type thing.
Yeah, and a lot of what they do is, help with traffic control, help with our prisoner transports, help with our paperwork on accidents and things like that to free us up to be able to do the law enforcement stuff.
Okay.
But they wear similar uniforms to us. They carry a gun. They carry cuffs and all of that. They just can't act on their own.
Like literally a sheriff's posse. Like
Yeah.
Townspeople, we need help. Join us.
We're short-staffed. If you've ever wanted to be a cop, come play one on your weekends because, we could use the extra personnel to kind of help us out.
I got to tell you, that's badass. That's cool.
And we love it. Some of these posse guys are putting in 50, 60 hours a week coming out and doing this. And the only reason they're not cops is because they either couldn't pass the physical back in the day. They got, back and knee problems or something,
sure.
Or they make too much money in the civilian world. Why would they give it up to go be a cop?
Got it.
So part of what they do in their field training is they ride with us, and we kind of show them around and teach them the ropes and things like that. And this particular posse guy had ridden with me a number of times, and I had decided that it was time for him to drive. So we get this call kick out about 4:00 in the afternoon of two young girls that had gotten trapped in a car and were unresponsive.
Ooh.
And we were maybe 10 or 15 miles away as the crow flies, but by roadways at that time, it was probably closer to 20. And during those days, the area that I was working was still primarily farm field. There was cotton fields, there was orange groves, things like that. The population was still not real high. And as a result, the nearest fire department was probably 40, 45 minutes out.
Oh, geez.
So
long.
He started, and sometimes our backup was 40, 45 minutes out too. So,
Damn.
We dealt with things a little differently than we would today. So he gets on it, and he's got to be doing 90 miles an hour at a minimum. Probably not safe speeds for what we were doing, but it was not fast enough, in my opinion, to get us there in time. If we'd have had a helicopter, it wouldn't have mattered. But we get there, and we come around the back part of the house where the girls were, and Dad's doing CPR on the 6-year-old. Grandpa's doing CPR on the 3-year-old. Mom's in the back door with baby brother just absolutely losing her mind. And we get over to these girls, and we knew damn well there wasn't anything we could do for them, but we were damn well going to do it anyway.
Yeah. And
so we start doing CPR on them, and we did CPR on them for probably 20, 25 minutes before fire gets there. And fire takes over CPR, and we're calling for a helo to land so that we can fly them to the nearest trauma center. And so once fire gets there, we go from CPR mode to we need to set up an LZ, because my backup still hadn't shown up to help with any of this. So right about the time that the helo's landing, my sergeant gets there, my corporal gets there. They start helping with the LZ. We get these girls loaded. We get them flown off. And my sergeant turns to me and says, okay, ID's en route. Detectives are en route. Go to the substation, start your paper, and then go home. I said, boss, I got like 8 hours left in my shift. It's the start of my shift. And he goes, no, you go home. So I get back to the substation. I get my rookie or my posse guy signed into a computer so he can start his report. And at that point, everything just kind of broke. And I walked outside and I called my wife, and my son is 3 months old at this time. I'm a brand new dad. And I called my wife, and all I could do was sob, and she's freaking out. She starts losing her mind thinking, I must have been shot, or I've been in an accident, or I'm dying, or who knows what. Finally was able to get out, kind of what had happened. And all I could tell her initially was just, please take care of our son, take care of him, take care of him. And once I finally kind of got control of myself, I explained to her what had happened. And then I collected myself. I was a smoker at the time, so half a pack later, I was ready to go in and, knock out my paper for the night. And then I went home.
Wow.
And that was, it was one of those things where my son's almost 20 now. So this is almost 20 years ago. I can still picture that little girl. I can still picture her blue eyes looking up at me. I can still picture every bit of that scene. I think the worst thing about it was a tragic accident. It was Dad was outside working on a motor with Grandpa, Mom was inside taking care of little brother. Mom thought Dad was watching him. Dad thought Mom was watching him. They had an old 80s model 2-door coupe. And you remember the old 80s cars that had the really heavy doors?
Yeah.
They had climbed in to get a toy or something, or they were playing inside. And, in 100-degree weather, the inside of a car is 150 in no time.
Yeah.
And they got so dehydrated so fast that they couldn't muscle the door back open to get out. And you could see their little handprints on the glass where they were pounding on it, trying to get Dad's attention. And he's over there revving a motor, not realizing what's going on 20 yards behind him.
Oh, my goodness.
And probably a month later, that posse member ended up having to take a call down that same road, go down that same dirt road where that house had been. And it was nothing. It was an alarm call, or it was nothing significant. Triggered the flashbacks, and he was out 2 days after that.
I'm sure.
Just couldn't, stomach it. And I was fortunate that I had my wife, I had my support systems, I had everything that I was able to kind of come back from that, but he never could.
Yeah, understandable. And so the kids didn't make it then?
No, unfortunately, both girls passed. And what we found out later was the evidence, or the ID tech that came out to photograph the scene and collect evidence and stuff. It was her cousin's kids. She didn't know it until she got there that the mom was one of her cousins. And so it really hit hard. It hit the whole department hard just because it was a child death, 2 child deaths, a family member and everything else. And it was just, it was one of those horrible things that every cop deals with to some degree at some point in time, but we all hope we never have to. And, it never leaves you. You never stop thinking about it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's like one of my biggest fears, because I know guys have dealt with things like that. And it's, we had a guy in my old job they went to a bad crash on the highway, and he had to do CPR on an infant, and the infant didn't make it. And he ended up going out with PTSD, and then, didn't have a great support system, ended up with substance abuse, and it essentially ruined his life. I mean, people have to realize that it's not all just like getting bad guys and stuff like that. We go to emergencies, trauma. Damn, that is a terrible call, Randall. Thank God that you had the support system in place and you were able to overcome that. And I'm sure guarantee, like you said, it's with you to today, but you were able to overcome it. Wow. Thank you for sharing that, man. That's intense. Shifting gears here a little bit. Do you have a heartwarming encounter that you'd like to share?
I was fortunate in a number of different situations to be able to help impact people's lives, especially as I was doing crimes against children, because you could see those kids later on and really be able to see how what you had done, how the investigation you'd done benefited them. They got them out of that situation where they were being abused, they were being exploited. I guess probably one of the best that I can think of off the top of my head. We arrested a guy in May of 2016. He's the one that I ended up going to trial on all the way in May of 2021. It initially came out as an individual that was trading child sexual abuse images online. And so we went and knocked on the door where the cyber tip came back to, and he wasn't there. He had moved. He was staying with a cousin while he was moving to Arizona from Texas. And so we ended up doing a one-party consent call with the cousin. We were able to get the evidence and the information that we needed to go to a secondary location and hit his house. And while we were going through the computers, we saw that not only was he trading online, but he had been sexually abusing his stepdaughter for about 7 years or so.
Jeez.
Fast forward to 2021, we're getting ready to go to trial on him because he had been sitting in custody the entire time. From May of 2016 to May of 2021, he's sitting in the Maricopa County Jail, dealing with that. And I start talking to the prosecutor, and I said, hey, is the victim going to be here? Is she going to have to testify? And he said, no, she's since moved on. She's gone on to another state. She's graduated high school. She is married. She's having a baby. She's doing excellent. Her life has completely changed and turned around since we were able to get her out of that environment and get him into custody and deal with him. And to know that I was able to get her out of that situation, that we were able to take her away from that abuse and get her the services that she needed to be able to go out and have a good life again, really helped. And I guess the icing on that particular heartwarming cake was we're sitting down, the jury has been picked, we're just getting ready to start the trial, and the defense attorney says, hey, my client says if you'll give him a plea of 20, we'll go ahead and take it right now, and we'll forget about this whole trial thing. And the prosecutor says, I'll give him 26. 26 flat, lifetime probation and registration, and after that, he's going to get 5 odd years time served out of that, but we'll give him 26 flat. Defense says, nope, won't do it. So the judge comes in, and we tell the judge, hey, judge, there was this last minute attempt at a plea. He wanted 20. We offered him 26. He said no. And the judge looks at him and says, sir, you understand that you've been charged with 10 counts of child exploitation. And that in the state of Arizona, the presumptive sentence on each of those is 17 years, but the minimum you'll get is 10 years per count. So if you get convicted on even 3 of these counts, you're going to be in prison for longer than the prosecutor's plea. Are you sure you don't want to take it? I said, nope, not going to take it. We said, okay, up to you. 4 days later, he was found guilty on all 10 counts, and he's spending the next 170 years in prison for what he did to that little girl and for his involvement in that. And I can't think of a better place for him. I can't think of a better resolution to that than he gets to spend the next 170 years in prison. And she has taken what he did, and it made her stronger, and she's living her life, and she's doing well. And, that's the happy ending that we hope all of them come to.
No better ending that I could think of. That's amazing. That's awesome. Randall, people who listen to the show are, like we talked about before we started, a lot of them are newer, thinking about police work, maybe are on the fence or just getting into academy. You have any words of wisdom for these new officers?
Treat every situation like you would want your family member to be treated. If you go out and you take every call, you take every traffic stop, and you extend the same respect and courtesy to that person that you would want somebody to extend to your family member if they were in that situation, your likelihood of getting in trouble is significantly reduced, because anything that you say can and will end up on YouTube. And so as a result, you need to treat people with the respect that you would want your family member to be treated with. Now, that's not to say that if somebody's a dirtbag criminal, that you're not still going to put them in handcuffs, that you're not still going to take them to jail.
Of course.
But you can always do that with a modicum of respect, because it's a lot easier to talk them into the backseat of your car than it is to wrestle them. And you're a lot less likely to end up on YouTube if you treat them with the respect that you would want them to be treated. And at the end of the day, you're going to end up a lot more successful in your career if people don't think that you're a Derek Chauvin or something like that, where you end up in a situation where you haven't extended that respect and it ends up a bad situation.
Absolutely. Great advice, brother. Let's switch gears here and talk about the you've become an author. You have one book already?
I do. My first book was kind of a labor of love. My great-grandfather in 1923 graduated from Ohio University and jumped in a 1917 Ford Model T and drove from Ohio to California with three of his buddies, and ended up keeping a journal all along the way about the people that they met and the things that they did, and even went so far as to record how much gas they used and the miles they went and how much oil they burned and things like that, the cost of gas. And in 1981, he took that journal and typed it up and was considering the idea of publishing it because he thought people would find it interesting. Fast forward to 2022, and I've got a little more time on my hands than I had during my career. And I thought, I'm going to take Pop's story and I'm going to publish it. And so I went out and I found the surviving family members of the other guys that he had been with and got some additional family stories and stuff. And Pop had included a bunch of photos in his journal that he took on the trip. And so I got some additional photos from some of the surviving family members and put it all together. And he called it Hellbent for California. And I thought, what better way to honor my family than to put his work out there. And so I got that published a couple of months ago. It's available on Amazon, both in a paperback format and in an ebook format. If you got Amazon Unlimited, you can even get it for free, which is the best price of all.
Yeah.
But then that kind of spurred my idea to do some writing. And so I've written a second book called Cyber Creeps. And it's all about my time in internet crimes against children and some of the weird cases that I had and some of the kind of crazy things. And that is, I'm in my last edits and proofs on that right now. I anticipate that to be out in the next, probably by mid-October. It'll be out before Halloween. How about that?
Is that the one I have up right here, Cyber Creeps?
It is. That's Cyber Creeps, and we're going through the last little bits of edits and things before I hit go.
Awesome. So I'll include those links for all the listeners in the show notes, and we'll put it on the website so you guys can check it out. Randall, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This was just as a parent and a cop, it was like super interesting to hear about your career, how cops are dealing with this stuff, and I'm really happy you still got your foot in the game. You're vetting new officers, which is super important, and you have the books going on, so it's really cool.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And most importantly, I think you have my website link, and if not, I'll make sure to get that to you. But there's some information in there, not only on the books, but on internet safety and ideas for parents to help keep their kids safe online. There's some links to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, a couple of other places. And what I would really hope is that anybody listening that has kids or grandkids or nieces and nephews or any access to children at all, go on there, look at the internet safety information, and find what speaks to you, find what fits your situation, and apply it, because there are so many kids online. There are so many kids that are getting handed what amounts to a loaded gun when they have a device that allows them access to everybody in the world. And if they're not being safe with it, like they would be safe with a loaded gun, it's just asking for trouble. And so I hope that there's resources out there that can be helpful. If you need specific resources, there's a contact on my website. Reach out to me. I will be happy to lend advice, answer questions, point you in the right direction. And if there's a situation going on that you or a child that needs help, let's get them the help that they need so that they're not being victimized and not being exploited online.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Randy. I truly appreciate it. I'm going to do the outro. Can you hang up in the green room for a second?
Will do. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it.
Guys, that was episode number 118. Randy Snyder. Fascinating stuff. Super interesting. Holy cow. Thank goodness there's police officers like that assigned to these assignments who are taking out these bad guys that are creeping on your kids. Absolutely disgusting. And thank goodness for guys like that. Guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. As always, I truly appreciate it. If you love the show and you want to show your support, go to Patreon. The link's in the show notes. Click on it and join that community. If you can't afford to do that, I totally get it. Not a problem. The show's going to remain free. And all I ask is that you do a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts to help bump the show up. So that's this week's episode. I love you guys, and I will see you next week.